Hello and welcome to this GryphonArt tutorial, which is going to show you how to make a milk carton style gift box using a piece of card which is a standard A5 in size. The milk carton box design was the first style of gift box I encountered, and it has been the inspiration and foundation of a whole range of gift boxes which I'm going to share with you over the next few months. It's a really versatile box which is very simple to construct, and in my opinion it's a great box for a beginner to start with. This box is relatively small, being 2 inches square and 4¼ inches high. In this design I have also included some decorative panels just to add some additional techniques for you. But if you are using a pretty card which stands well on its own and you don't want to break that up, you can just miss out the panel sections of this tutorial. I have created a template which is in PDF form and can be downloaded from my website at GryphonArt.co.uk. The measurements indicating where you need to score are marked on the template, along with the cutting lines and where you need to place your double-sided tape. So if you feel that this will make life easier for you and it's just for your own personal use, please feel free to download this. The diagram, by the way, is to scale as long as you print it off at 100%. Now the first thing that we need to do in making any box is to score lines where we need to place folds. The scoring weakens the card along the score line and makes it easier to fold along that line. I am using a Martha Stewart scoring board, which is a specialist tool, but you can achieve the same results using a self-heal mat, ruler and bone folder if you don't have one of these. Now, if this is completely new territory for you, then it might help you to first watch my video Card Scoring Tools tutorial, which demonstrates both of these scoring methods. Before we start scoring, we do need to ensure that our card is positioned as squarely as possible, and if you're just starting out, then it might be worth you recutting your card if you're unable to get a good right angle forming between the top and the left hand side of your card. In this instance, the bottom edge is not that important because this forms the bottom of your box, and the right hand edge will form the side flap for joining the box, so neither of these will be visible. Just to finish up on this subject, if you are using a card as I am that has a straight line pattern on it, you also do need to ensure that the pattern is parallel to the edge of your card. If you don't check this, then there's a chance that the pattern will not sit square to the sides of your box, and that's probably not a look that you're aiming for. Right, finally we can start to score, and the first set of lines are these, which are at 2-inch intervals and will form the sides of our box. So with my card in landscape mode, I need to score at 2, 4, 6 and 8-inch intervals, which just leaves us with this small flap at the end which will be used to join the box together. Bearing in mind that this is the top of the box, I'm now going to turn my card anti-clockwise so that I can score the lines to form this top section or closing section of the box, the top of the main box and the bottom of the box. Now if I refer to my template, I know that these occur at 3/8 of an inch, 1 7/8 of an inch, so just down from the 2-inch mark, or up depending on which way you're working, and 4 5/8 of an inch. I'm now going to turn my card clockwise, so back to landscape mode with the top of my box at the top. And I'm going to put in these tiny score lines which will enable us to more readily position these diagonal score lines. Now you can see that these only occur on 2 sides of the box, so we're only going to score alternate panels on our card. Do one, miss one sort of thing. Once again, if I refer to my template, I know that these need to be at 1 inch and 5-inch points. So the middle of the first panel and the middle of the third panel. Now you're only scoring a 3/8 of an inch line down to this first horizontal score line, which I'll just do now. So we said 1 inch and 5-inch. Now that's the scoring board finished with for this particular box design. We do have the diagonal lines to put in place, but I find it much easier to use my self-heal mat for this task, so I'm just going to set everything up for that. Before we score the diagonal lines, we are just going to fold all the lines we have scored so far. As you fold, you can line up, I don't know whether you can see that, you can line up your score lines just as a double check that everything is square. This is much more important than trying to line up the edges of the card, which may not have been square in the first place. I'm just going to do this. It won't take long, so I will just run through this. It's not easy to see actually with this particular card, but when you're sorting on your own, you can make sure that these fold lines on here line up with the score line there. That's the main thing. Okay. As that wasn't easy for you to see, I've just temporarily switched over to this other colour card so that you can get a better idea. You can see better here perhaps how these fold lines that I've already made are in line nice and squarely with this score line there, so you know that you're on the right track to getting a square finished box. I hope that helps you. We are now ready to put in our diagonal lines, so I'm going to stick with this colour box for the moment so that this is more visible for you. The reason why we have folded the lines that we have already scored to this point is because we are now going to score on the right side of the box, and if you're not using a scoring board, you will not see the lines on the right side of your card until you have folded them. So we'll just turn the card over to the right side, and if you can't quite see those little score lines that you made in the first and third columns, just bend them a little to make them more visible. Okay, so we're now ready to put the diagonal lines in. I tend to position my card so that the small 3/8 of an inch section is to the left hand side and the joining flap is at the bottom nearest to me. This could be because I'm right-handed, so please work in a way that is most comfortable for you. Now, because we've turned the card over, effectively flipping it, so remember it's the right side that's facing up, so effectively this side of the card that's facing upwards. Our first column with the little marker line is now at the top. What we need to do is to form two diagonal score lines in this cell, as it were. And I'm going to show you this on the template so that you can see clearly what you're aiming for. This does show all the score lines as though they are on the wrong side of the card, but I think you should be able to get the gist. Okay. In order to achieve this, I'm going to use my ruler and bone folder, simply lining up the points as you would with a pencil and scoring the lines. Now I do tend to place my bone folder on the point that I want to draw to or score to, because if you put the ruler up first, the width of the bone folder would be in the wrong place. It would make the line in the wrong place. So I'll just show you that again. And I go over it a couple of times just because you really need to do that when you're not working with a scoreboard. The scoreboard has air behind the line you're scoring, so it means that there's less resistance to a score line. Last one. Okay. We're now going to fold those lines, and they can be a bit tricky because of where they're positioned, and this one at the end is definitely the easiest. Now, if you put your thumbs in front, you can generally just coax that line in place. Now, once you've got it in place and you can nip it, then you can place it back onto a flat surface and use a bone folder or paper creaser, something like that, just to force that crease into place. And just bear in mind that you are only folding within that single cell. You don't want to fold into this space up here. Okay, now if we go again, I'll just demonstrate because it gets harder the further you're in. You can see just applying pressure either side of that line can just coax it into a point where you can maybe just pinch it. And once you can find a flat edge, then put it down and firmly apply pressure so that it's in place. I'll repeat that for the next one and then I'll come back to you. Now that we have all score lines and folds in place, we can prepare the box for assembly. So if we do a dry run for a moment, with this being the top of the box, you can see that in order to achieve the flaps for folding down at the bottom of our box, we're going to need to cut into the sides here. And that's what we're going to do next. Now, you do need to be fairly precise with these cuts because any excess left over the edges will protrude from the bottom of your box. To prevent this, you could cut a slanted line in either side of the fold, but I do find that the straight edges of the flaps help you to square the box during assembly, so it's a matter of preference really. Sometimes it can help to keep the scissors on track if the card is slightly bent at the fold. Just remember that you're just cutting to this very first dissecting fold line. So I'm just going to do that now. So there you go, that's the first flap, and we've just got others to do. Okay. Now this last little section here, you can see there's a little bit of excess. So we don't actually need that. So we continue cutting as we have before for the flaps. So we've got 4 in total. And as you can see, this area here, what we're going to do now is just cut that away altogether, because we definitely don't need it. All right. So there we go. We've got 4 flaps now. And if I redo that dry run, we can see how that's going to work. The final thing we need to do for the box itself is to apply the double-sided tape, and I always have to think about this. I've returned to my original card just because you can more clearly see which is the right side, and I think it will avoid confusion. I'm just going to turn it over though, because the first pieces of tape we apply will be to the inside. If I show you the template, you should see how it matches what we have in front of us, and hopefully you should also be able to see that we need to place double-sided tape on 3 of the flaps only on the inside of the box. The last one is marked up, place tape on outside. I'm just going to apply the tape along the bottom of each of the 3 flaps. Sometimes it's helpful to move the unwanted ones out of the way when you're doing this. I like to get it quite close to the edge of the flap, but you don't really want it to stick over the top. That's the first. Number 2 coming along. There we go. If we quickly refer back to our template, we can see we need double-sided tape on the right side of the remaining flap and also on the right side of our joining flap. So I'm just going to turn the card over so that I can do that. Now, because you definitely want the top of the card to stick well, I tend to get the tape to the edge, again not over the edge because you don't want any stickiness inside your box, but as close to the top as possible. And sometimes I do use glue here, but keep it as dry as possible so that it doesn't distort the card, because unfortunately any moist glue can often distort the card if it's absorbed into it. So I can see that this is the remaining flap at the end here. So that just needs a bit of tape, as before. We are now ready to assemble the box, but as I am going to be decorating it with panels which are easier to apply before assembly, the next thing I'm going to do is to prepare those. If you don't want to do this, you can fast forward to the assembly section of this tutorial, and I have included a static divider within the video to help you locate this more easily. As you can see here, I have cut out all the card for my panels according to the sizes which were just provided in the opening graphic for this section. These will be stuck using double-sided tape which I have already applied to the backs of the panels. I prefer double-sided tape for this task because I find PVA a little too wet, which can distort the card, and I have found that some of the stick glues don't always have long-term adhesion, but it is a matter of preference, so if you are confident with another form of glue, please feel free to substitute it. I use as much tape as I can get onto the backs of these panels, and if I just show you one of each size, then you will get a better idea. Hope you can see that. You can probably get away with less tape, but I tend to err on the side of caution. You just want to avoid getting any tape beyond the edges here, because if that happens it can result in sticky areas on the outside of your box. Once all the tape has been applied, the panels themselves can be constructed, and I have found out the hard way that it is best to arrange them in their intended position first, so that you don't remove the tape from the larger panel section by mistake. So they haven't been fixed, they've just been put into order. With that done, working with one panel at a time, you can remove the tape from the smaller piece of card and stick it to the larger piece. Just as a tip to help you center the panels, if you set up a dry panel to start with, making sure that you have an even margin all the way round, then you can use this as a guide. When you come to do the real thing, if you just move this one actually out of the way so you can see a bit better, if you just place the very edge of the smaller panel on top of the larger panel, adjusting its position until you are sure that the margin that you require is even on all four sides, takes a little bit of adjusting. You can then use the finger to hold that edge firmly in place and then release the rest of the panel so that the card drops into place, and that remaining margin should automatically sort itself out. Okay, so I'm now going to do that with the rest of the panels and then I'll come back to you. We're now ready to use the same method to apply our layered panels to our box. Now I am going to stick the panels to my purple box, but I've just set them up for you on this plain colour so that you can more easily see the margins. Unfortunately they are difficult to see on camera on the check pattern. You can immediately see that it's easier to line all the panels up before the box is assembled. It's also easier to apply pressure to them once they are in place for better adhesion. Without actually sticking these, I'm just going to show you that by using this panel as a guide, so positioning it where I want it, I can then remove the tape off the double-sided tape on this one, and using that margin, space it away so there's an equal spacing between the fold line, lining it up top and bottom, so using exactly the same method as before, hold that in place and let it drop. So that is the principle that I'll be applying when I come to put it on my purple card. Now once you've got all of those in place, you can again use the same process for these smaller panels which go on the cells where there's no diagonal fold line, so they will be positioned in there. So I'm going to get that to that stage on my purple card and then I can come back to you again. Before we move on to assembly, just for your additional information, the million-dollar question is, at what stage do you decorate your box? As a general rule of thumb, I would suggest the following thought process. First of all, so number one, do the decorations extend over the fold lines, as is the case here? If the answer is yes, then decorate after assembly. If we took this box apart, we would find that the length of this decoration would be longer than the length of the corresponding box card because it's having to stretch over these corners. Therefore, if you assembled it flat packed, when you came to assemble the box and put those folds into place, there's a significant risk that this section would tear at these corners. If the answer to question 1 was no, so you are still able to decorate before assembly, then the next question is, does the decoration still leave the box flat? Now we know in the case of our panels, that's absolutely fine. But if I show you these additional decorations, I'm hoping that you can see that they protrude from the sides of the box. And as you will see later, you try to hold your box flat when you assemble it, and it's likely that these will be problematic in enabling you to keep your box square. There are no rights and wrongs, and you will no doubt form your own conclusions, but I'm hoping this will give you a base to work from. Right then, let's assemble our box. The first thing we need to do is to join the sides together, and I like to do a dry run of this first just as a precaution. So with right side facing down, and I like to have this little flap at the top, I just fold the first side of the box down for better access and draw the bottom edge up to meet it. I can then check. Actually, I'm going to do this with this coloured card so you can see more easily. But so fold that edge down and that one up, and you can then see whether these lines line up nicely. Now, it's these two lines that are most important because they form the main box section of your box, and it's more obvious if they're out of line. If they are marginally out, you can generally just centre the sides, and when the box comes together it sorts itself out. But if they're wildly out, it's probably worth rescoring this bottom line and making your box a little shorter. You'll cut into that, and any existing score lines on view will fold underneath your box, so that's a remedy of sorts. Okay, let's get my other box back. Once you're happy that everything is as you intended, you can remove the double-sided tape and stick the sides together. Can't get it off. Oh, tricky. There we go. So, and I have found it easy to work with the main section to start with, so just that section there. And then once you're happy with that in place, the rest normally just falls down to meet it. So there we are. So that's that bit. We can now tackle the bottom, but I tend to fold the top roughly into place first because it has the effect of squaring the box up a bit. So just line up the sides, and then once you're happy that it's even, you can press those folds in the centre. Okay, so that's where we're at. Now the next thing I do is I just fold these flaps outwards so that I can see where my double-sided tape is. And as a rule of thumb, I do like the last flap that goes down to be the front flap. It's an idiosyncrasy. I just think it looks better, but you know, I'll leave that to you to make up your own mind over time. So we can see here that this flap is the one that has the double-sided tape on the outside, and that's the one we're going to work with first. So what we do is we fold that one in. We can remove the double-sided tape from both of these sections, and then we can stick it. So I remove it from both of these. And then we can square that up as we do, and just once we're happy with them being square, can just apply a little pressure. Oh, it's popping apart again, it's not sticking very well. Using a bone folder or ruler actually helps, just to put some pressure on there. And then I do like to press it down. You can look on the inside, check that it's still square, and using your ruler, just make sure that tape's in place. Okay. So the next thing is just to check where the front of your box is, and you can do this. Sometimes it's easier on the inside. You can see that that's the back of the box. That's where the join is. So that's the next flap that we want to stick down. So it's just a case now, quite straightforward. Now the first one's in. Removing that double-sided tape, squaring that flap up with your base, and that can go down. And then just the last one. Right, so they're all in place now. Just like to apply some pressure using a ruler or a bone folder, something that will reach the bottom of your box, just to make sure that's now firmly in place. So there we are. So the last thing we're going to do is the closure, and I just want to have a brief word with you about those before we head on. Once you get into box making, you begin to realise that there are a lot of different methods that you can use for closures, which include Velcro, ribbon, pegs, elastic, wire, etc, etc. And it is my plan to do a specialist video on milk carton closures, so do subscribe to the GryphonArt channel if you want to know when that one becomes available. Initially I used ribbon, so just punching a couple of holes into the back of the top closing section that I could thread my ribbon through and then form a bow on the front of the box. This method is absolutely fine. If you have a hole punch, by all means use it. Now the only consideration I would have is that if you were giving a gift to someone who might struggle to tie a ribbon, an alternative method might be preferable to maintain the look and feel of the box. With this in mind, and also considering my desire to colour coordinate, I decided to simply use a band of card that would fit around the top of the box to keep it in a closed state. These can be removed and refitted with relative ease, so the box remains reusable. Additionally, if you still prefer the look of a bow, you can simply stick one to the band and you have the same effect with the same reusability. So let's get on and I'll show you how to make those closures. So we start with our box and a strip of card that needs to be over 3 times the width of the box in length. So in this case, with our box being 2 inches square, it needs to be over 6 inches long. Now, we know that the closing section here is 3/8 of an inch deep, so the width of the strip is not precise. you can choose your width really, as long as the card's strong enough, but it doesn't want to be wider probably than 3/8 of an inch in most cases. We are going to fit the closure to the box, as the openings can vary in size according to the card thickness, and you do want to be able to remove it and replace it. So the first thing I'm going to do, again, I like to know that I've got the front of the box in front of me, facing me. And then I just hold the strip of card at the back of the box, almost to, but not quite at the end. Keep the closure in place as it should be, and just fold the card strip around the end of the box. So you've got like a hairpin there. And then you're going to repeat that process to fold it back on itself again. And that way you can see, if you now cut it slightly short to remove the excess. Okay, so you've got a little bit left over there, and that's the first bit achieved. Now I'm going to stick this. I want to make sure, if you can use some glue for this if you're happier with that, but what you're going to do is make sure that you want to have glue on as much of these surfaces as you can. Now if you try to put glue all the way along there, the danger is it will go into a space where you're not actually having overlapping card. So the best way I've found to do this is to apply double-sided tape or glue to a reasonable 3/4 area of length along this strip, and then on the one it's going to stick to, but on the inside. So I'm going to do that, and once it's in place I'll come back and just show you exactly how that's going to look. Right, so I've now applied the double-sided tape to this edge here and to this edge here, they're going to overlap when they're fixed, and that will mean that the actual area of adhesion I then know is going to extend the full length of where I want it. So just remove the double-sided tape on both sides, or if you've glued, that's absolutely fine. And I tend to just fit the front in place first, holding it. Make sure you've got where the stickiness is on the outside, that comes down first. And then the other flap can come over. You just want to make sure that it lines up nice and squarely, keeping it as tight as you can, but it doesn't need to be overly tight, otherwise you won't remove it as easily and replace it as easily. And there we are. That's your band enclosure finished. So that's a fairly basic milk carton style gift box, and once you get to grips with this template, it opens up so many other designs for you, not just limited to larger and smaller versions such as these, which I will certainly be covering in future tutorials, but also completely different designs that you wouldn't have expected to originate from this template. Over the next few months I will be generating lots of videos based on this template, so if you have enjoyed this tutorial and would like to learn more, please subscribe to the GryphonArt channel to ensure you are notified as new videos are published. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching.